we have to wear our jackets?
Sam is wondering whether we have to wear jackets. This is a really good time to discuss this. If everyone would like to take a view, we could do a poll.
Yeah, we could do a poll, The microphone's on the jacket.
Hi everyone, and lovely to see you here in this eventful afternoon at conference. It seems a great time to stop and take stock, take a snapshot of what people in this party are thinking about each other and about their leaders and about their wannabe leaders and about people who maybe do or don't want to be leader, depending on the day you ask them. The only poll that matters is the one on election day. I think this is one of the great untruths of politics, happily for the model of pollsters, like our friends here at YouGov, because they are not only snapshots of moments in time, they are windows into the cells of the people who are polled. They tell us things that they don't want to let us know under their own names. They can also be predictors. They can set courses. They can stop people in their tracks. They can be reality checks, and they can embolden the brave to maybe go over the top and make those moments in politics, which we love to cover at Politico and Sky, when things fundamentally change. So none better to take us through some exclusive new polling than our friend Patrick English, next to me, from YouGov, whose Labour membership polling is dropping live right now here at conference in partnership with us at Politico and Sky News.
And welcome effectively to a live edition of Politics at Sam and Anne's. And we actually have a load of material every week from Patrick on it. So it's great to have him here because a lot of you will know, like the picture on there of my professional marriage to Anne. Well, the secret is that I have a second professional marriage kind of to Patrick as well, because there's a partnership between Sky News and YouGov, which is very special to me as well. There are 3 people on stage. That's the end of that metaphor. But I just thought that we would take stock, because these moments where you do a Labour poll at a moment of drama really, and all members' polls really matter. They, as Anne says, they change the story. They can change the direction of events. So before we get going with the results, I'm going to ask Patrick, when we publish these stuff, are you sure we're right?
Yes. Yes. We've been doing this for a very long time, and those of you will probably remember the 2020 leadership election, and our polling there was very accurate for that. We had the most accurate MRP projection of the last election. We have a huge panel in the UK that we comb through regularly to check things like, how is the Labour Party membership changing? So we're constantly monitoring that and trying to build the best possible models of the Labour Party membership, so that when we go and talk to Labour Party members, we can be certain, A, that they are members, and B, that we understand what the membership looks like now, how that might have changed, and be confident in the results that we're giving.
That's the right answer. Right, so without further ado, we're going to get on to the results that you're going to hear first from our Labour members poll. Breaks down into 3 sections. They're all relevant questions. You might not like the questions, but we have asked them because they're important questions. And they're questions of what Labour members think of the leadership. They're questions about what they think of the deputy leadership contest, but they're also what they think about potential leadership contenders. And that is where we want to start. I'll tell you the results and then throw open the discussion to Anne and to Patrick to chew this over. So the headline, the top line of the Labour members poll for Sky News and Politico is that Andy Burnham would beat Keir Starmer amongst Labour members by a vast margin, by about 2-1. In our poll of 704 Labour members taken a week ago, 62% would back Burnham and 29% would back Starmer. They pretty much all knew their mind. Already 9% who were don't knows. And just for context, if you ask people, Labour members, to pick who they would want to succeed Keir Starmer, Andy Burnham is so far out in front. 54% pick Burnham, right? The next person down is Angela Rayner on 10%, right? And she's kind of out of the race now a bit, I think, probably. Then Wes Streeting on 7, Ed Miliband and Yvette Cooper on 6, and Shabana Mahmoodi gets talked a lot on 2, right? So that's why we're having a discussion about Andy Burnham. I know he is not an MP. I know the path to him becoming an MP is very hard. Nevertheless, were he to be an MP and there was a contest under Patrick's YouGov Labour members polling, he would wipe the floor with Keir Starmer. Anne, what do you think?
Wow, good news for Andy Burnham, right? I mean, he's been kicked around the park at conference by everyone piling in on him on the loyalty principle. And kind of fair enough. And I think, a lot of the media, for good reasons, we like people to talk to us and say strong things, have reflected that. I mean, I think it's a bit of a jaw dropper, actually, Patrick, because what this says to me, and is a bit of a sort of course correction in my mind when we cover it, is no wonder if you are anti-Andy Burnham challenging Keir Starmer, you keep making the argument, it's impossible, we can't do that, it's impossible, you can't, how are we going to do it? Because if you take that out of the way, as Sam laid out there in your polling shows, just to flip it over to you, that statistic is a very strong one. I also think it shows something that maybe is, when I talk about polling being important in ways people often don't think. Psychologically, there's a bit of a picture of Andy Burnham is a bit deluded. He's like, he thinks he's better than he is. And, sorry, Andy.
It's true.
But it is true. It is true. And that he makes mistakes and he runs with his own. And, these are not briefings that are unfamiliar. Even including people go, I like Andy, but, But in fact, it seems like he's in a much stronger underlying position. And if we miss this, when we cover politics, then we're missing something quite big.
It's a bit of what we did to Boris Johnson, if I'm being honest.
Oh,
because
gosh,
there was a lot
what
of.
did we do to Boris Johnson?
Well, there was a lot of. He's good, but look at the flaws.
That's what.
Yeah, I think that's very, very, very important to note, is that you can understand why the party is so insistent or really trying to big up the case of the impossibility of it, the toughness of his path to even becoming an MP, then to sort of get then. In that scenario, that if he is then in front of the membership, as his polling shows, he's just going to wipe the floor. It's over at the point where he becomes an MP, and that contest is triggered according to this polling. And I think that 8%, 9% don't know figure is really telling. This is not something that we can expect the members to be moving too much on. They're pretty clear on this, and that's a really important statistic.
Because so many different bits of elections, the kind of uncertainty is not driven in changes of the headline number. People don't change their mind in politics very often. What happens when polling numbers move is people move from the don't know column to a side. But there just isn't much scope for that because they've made up their mind.
Exactly.
Because Andy Burnham's been around in politics for 20 years, so why wouldn't you have a view? Keir Starmer's been in your face for 6 years, so why wouldn't you have a view? And people have, it takes a lot to shift people's opinion.
The question that follows from this for me is, and I'm seeing it not much how anyone else is, why do you respond to this, right? Because if you look at this and you are trying to make the argument like Keir Starmer that you're open to a much better conversation with your party, but at the same time, when you've got member polls going completely the other way to the way that you might like them to go, and that's what I mean. I don't know if you could think, Patrick, of anything similar or analogous in the past where I feel like what comes out is quite inconvenient. And then how do people then respond to it?
Well, I think one of the interesting parallels or non-parallels is how long it took for Conservative Party members to turn against Boris Johnson. And what we saw, we were polling about him when he was sort of bouncing from crisis to crisis. The members really stuck with him, and the party in that sense felt united behind Johnson in a way that it just does not feel like it's the same for Starmer. And again, I think that points to a very tricky situation that the Prime Minister is in with his own party.
And one of the interesting things that breaks down, I think, at the moment, I'm just trying to pull up the numbers as we speak, is that when you dig into the numbers, and we'll come on to the deputy leadership results in a second, but it is quite clear that if you back Bridget Phillipson, you are less likely to like Andy Burnham than vice versa. So let me just pull up those numbers here.
There's also tribes being established almost within the membership.
Exactly. So if you are a Phillipson supporter, 38% of you like Andy Burnham and 53% like Keir Starmer. And if you're a Powell supporter, 77% of you like Andy Burnham and 19% of you like Keir Starmer. And again, we'll come on to the deputy leadership race in a moment, but that's really, really important because it shows that there is a bit of this race, as much as the leadership contenders, the deputy leadership contenders themselves tell you that this isn't a proxy for anything. Those numbers show a correlation, a mathematical correlation between your like or your dislike of your leader and your preference of an opponent and your choice of deputy leadership contest. The numbers tell the story, not the briefings.
They absolutely do, and I think it's interesting to note that within the membership data, Powell is sort of starting to establish herself as that candidate of, if you're frustrated with how things are going, if you're frustrated with the leadership, I'm the one you should back. And I think that's how we see that coalescing between Powell and Phillipson supporters and liking or disliking Ben and wanting him to perhaps take over as leader.
Well, let's see how that's working out as we turn to the battle of the deputies. So your poll found 35% would back Lucy Powell, 28% would back Bridget Phillipson, with 30% don't knows. That's a lot more than your previous category. Interesting what you make of that, but decently there for Lucy Powell, and only 5% not going to vote. So that, excluding those, suggests that Powell is ahead of Phillipson, so 56 to 44%. That's a closer margin than some other pollsters.
It absolutely is.
Apart from the fact saying you're right.
Well, so yes, we think that the contest is much closer, and I think one of the reasons that we believe that is we do think that the membership has fundamentally changed from the one which elected Keir Starmer even in 2020. We think a lot of the members, well, a significant proportion of the members who backed Rebecca Long-Bailey in that election, so who would be one of the most sort of natural, I am frustrated with the current leadership, have actually left the party, and it's tipping the balance of the Labour membership a bit more toward the centre. So I think that's why we show a closer race than others, I think, might be looking at it from perhaps using different sorts of underlying assumptions about how the race is going and having a much larger power lead than we do. But the point about the don't knows is really important. As you say, it's such a contrast, indeed, such a contrast to the Burnham and Starmer dynamic. And I think if you are Bridget Phillipson and if you are sort of those backing her, you're going to look at that and say there's plenty of juice left in this. There's a lot of ways still to go. And that probably is a source of encouragement, even though we do think she is behind at the minute.
Might be one reason why she's turning up in the pub tomorrow to have a chat with us. What do you make of this, Sam? Because it's a bit closer than some other pollsters, but also does it really nail it on yet for Lucy Powell?
No, I think I'm totally Team Patrick, always Team Patrick, always Team Anne as well. But there are that number of 30% don't knows is where the contest is now headed. So there would be spring in the step, I think, of the Bridget Phillipson campaign at seeing that.
Okay. You sure you think it's actually better for
I mean,
Bridget
clearly
than,
Lucy Powell's ahead.
Yeah.
But this is that figure, the headline figure of 56 to 44. It does not take many people to inject themselves into that from the 30% that are undecided to cause a difference. But look, from space, there are two massive correlations that you can see. Patrick referred to one of it. You referred to Rebecca Long-Bailey. Let's call it by what it is. The left,
yes.
Right? The left overwhelmingly go for Lucy Powell. 84% of people who voted Long-Bailey in 2020 go for Lucy Powell. That is an absolutely hardcore, total slam dunk, statistically pretty nailed on correlation there. Here's another one. Brexit vote, right? Now, if you voted Brexit, you're more likely to vote Bridget Phillipson. If you voted Remain, you're more likely to vote Lucy Powell. Bridget Phillipson, North East MP, has got a slightly Brexiteer, presumably slightly anti-establishment vibe to part of her.
I'm from the North East, so I'm on board with that. Not on the Brexit thing, but the vibe is not on the policies, but on the Brexit and kind of how does that feed in? That sense of we still understand, sorry Sam, but just to break in there for a minute, we understand how you feel if you don't like the establishment. That just there are certain sort of bubbles of Labour opinion, including the North East. I think that's quite strong. Sorry.
Sorry, am I the establishment?
You are. You just let the posh show, but anyway.
So there we go. So I think there's quite a lot. But what I think that also tells us is that Lucy Powell will potentially have a route to this contest as a sort of steady as she goes, hope that it breaks, that the results break down kind of in the way that they've broken down so far, and she clinches it. But the numbers suggest she's all but got a mandate to cause a whole lot of trouble for Keir Starmer if she does actually get that deputy leadership. And let's be honest, why wouldn't she? She's already forsworn a government job, and maybe she takes a sort of Commons leader type job, which is sort of not really in the government, being around the government table a bit. But I mean, if I was in number 10, I would want Lucy Powell like a hole in the head. She's got the backing of the left. She has got people who don't like Keir Starmer lining up behind her. She is, whether she wants to be or not, a totem for people who are unsure about Keir Starmer. What's to like if you're in number 10 right now?
I think the timing of her being removed from that position is actually incredibly helpful for her in this race, because it gives her that authenticity and credibility to be like, I am not actually part of this. I'm as frustrated as you are.
That was my anti-establishment point within this Labour race.
Exactly, quite so. So she can use that as an angle, as a sort of a credible beacon to say, I'm as frustrated as you are. I was removed from this position. I'm no longer part of that, so, vote for me. And
cliquish, inward-looking. But hang on, isn't there a bit of a paradox here? You told us a sort of, earlier on there was there were a lot of people around the kind of the Burnham camp, and that was quite sort of decided. Then we know there's a lot of undecided people. Lucy Powell, I am told, doesn't, and fair enough, actually, it's a race of two women, and Labour, for all its many advances, never quite kind of makes anyone lead who's a woman, so there's that. I don't think she likes to be seen as a cipher only for Andy Burnham, and I can completely understand that. But on sort of what you've polled, maybe she should be a cipher for Andy Burnham. So now I'm like, my gender studies is all over the place.
Okay. Should we do the third and final area in this poll?
I actually wanted Patchy to answer that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Does she do better by attaching to Burnham on what you've seen more formally?
I think based on the evidence of this polling data, I think it could be worth a shot, because Burnham, he sweeps the floor with Starmer, and he's picking up all of this frustration. So if Powell can become that person and that sort of lightning rod to be, I also represent that frustration. Myself, it'd be difficult though, because obviously he's not an MP. He's also more of an outsider, which is why I think we do see that differential in the don't knows, because yes, Lucy Powell did get removed from her position, but she still was in that cabinet. She still is an MP. She's not quite got the same outsider value as Andy Burnham has, not even being in Parliament.
Right, now let's move on to what Labour members should think should happen to this leadership. And only barely just over half, 53% of Labour members say that Keir Starmer should take the Labour Party into the next election as Prime Minister, as leader. And 37%, so well over a third, are now saying they want Keir Starmer out. The question is, should stand at the next election. 37%, almost 4 in 10, now saying Keir Starmer should not lead this party into the next election. A couple of associated numbers. Actually, people are ever so slightly more sympathetic to him. 33% say he's doing a bad job compared to 62%. So you even think he's not doing too bad, but you don't want him to stand. And actually, Labour's own view of itself is much better than the view of Keir Starmer. So they don't think the Labour government is doing so badly. But they do think that Keir Starmer, and that is a difficult lump. It's not it's not impossible to get over those figures, but that is problematic and clearly has shifted dramatically over the course of the last 12 months, because I think you barely would have got single figures for that in this cohort back shortly after the July general election last year. Anne?
I'm interested in historically, Patrick, how you're seeing this. I mean, I can only echo what you're saying. It's not good, is it? I mean, it's like he's not calling home going, "Hey, babes, it's all right. Honestly, I've seen the poll. It's really good." So there's just that general undertow of dissatisfaction. You put the numbers on it. They are. They're not extreme, but they are a substantial, like a block. I was actually writing about this for a sister publication event today. So starting from saying, "Hey, what's gone wrong with Keir Starmer?" I mean, if you're sitting in another capital and you're an interested political readership, you're like, "I'm sorry, what? Like this seemed all to be so good." So that seems, to be substantial. I suppose my only the voice, the gremlin in the back of my own head says, politics has been so changeable. Opinions have been so changeable. There's something like a Labour sort of mood that we live in, and they're up, they're down, they're heroes, they're villains, and yet something comes out in the wash. How do you look at the numbers, knowing what you know, because you've got exposure to a lot of other polling data across other areas,
I think the point is very good, and then I would say only 1 in 10 did not know their response to that question about whether Starmer should be going or should be staying until the next election. So again, it's something that there's not a lot of room for manoeuvre there, not a lot of room for opinions to change or shift in different directions. So I think that is very important. Looking at the level of uncertainty between the different numbers, and it's low there.
Regular listeners of Politics of Sam and Anne's know that there's a good deal of real life that goes on when we're doing our recording in the morning, whether it's kids making breakfast or the cat. I'm literally having to organise my kids' childcare right now. That's why I was on my phone.
Should we do a poll or whether this is...
Anyway, so if you're wondering why I'm on my phone, it's because, like, we're just sorting out real life. It never stops. Right, Patrick, there is another story within this set of polling which you think is quite interesting about whether or not this party is ready and braced for welfare changes. Do you want to explain what it is?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting story that we picked out. So members overall are split on whether or not welfare spending should be reduced by 48 to 46. So really, in a poll of 700 people, that's a statistical tie. They do, however, think that the next deputy leader should be supportive of future changes to try and address the welfare situation, and that margin is 58 to 30%. But equally, they thought by 60% of them thought that the welfare changes that were tried to put through previously were the wrong priority at the time. So I think that creates a really interesting picture of where the Labour Party membership is right now. So it's not the case that they don't want welfare touched whatsoever. There's certainly a constituency of members that think that this issue needs to be addressed. And even if they're thinking about perhaps putting Powell in there, sort of disruptor to Starmer, they still want that person to be constructive within the party regarding those changes for welfare. But perhaps it's going to be an issue of timing and exactly what is done. But interesting numbers, I think, in there.
Can I just ask Patrick something? You said a couple of times in two contexts that there's a group of people you don't think are going to change their minds. But what's the evidence for that, seeing that we've seen a lot of voter groups doing things that journalists, pollsters, analysts, academics, etc., would have thought they wouldn't do? Or you sometimes see it in the horseshoe a bit between Reform and Labour, or like Labour trade unionists have a greater attraction to aspects of Nigel Farage and Reform than ever were taught in the politics courses at university. So I mean, how sure are you when you say that? Have you seen any indication that could be perhaps more changeable than you've reflected here?
Well, quite. I mean, what's the unprecedented counter we're at now? 2 million or something like this? So, quite. I think, yeah, you are completely correct to say that, things do change in ways that we just don't expect or haven't traditionally expected them to. And we are in a period of great volatility, and we are in a period of great uncertainty, and voters doing things that we perhaps don't expect. What I would say is that the transition, or the types of changes that you tend to see, tend to be people sort of moving quickly in one direction or another direction and then staying there for a while until some event happens.
Right,
or some,
so they do stick in
they
place.
tend to stick there. So the first movements you tend to see, as Sam has said, is sort of uncertainty to a position. Then the position is generally maintained until something big happens, like an election or some kind of scandal, some kind of fallout. And then you might see another shift, and they'll stick there. So barring something unprecedented, so what's that, a 2 million and one? I think this is probably where we're at and where we're going to land. But,
we've got about 4 minutes left. We really want questions particularly for Patrick. Patrick is basically the best pollster in the country, the best company in the country, and so it's a pleasure for me to be able to ask him questions. So feel to dream one up. I'm going to go slightly off topic and ask you a different type of polling question. Last week, Sky and YouGov did this ginormous MRP, the polling projection that projects every seat in GB. And that was basically a landslide for Reform, and the Tories went down to the mid-30s in seats, and Labour 100 and something. But we were just talking about the permanence of results. And I'm going to ask you to think of all of the polling that you've done and project this scenario. The one thing I can see totally disrupting politics in this Parliament one more time is if Nigel Farage detaches from Reform. How big a deal would that be? would that mean another spin of the disruption wheel to the way that we see our politics?
I think it certainly would, yes. Nigel Farage is a huge personality. Everybody in this room knows that, and probably everybody listening knows that. He's someone that the public know. He's someone that attracts a lot of favourability among a solid third of the public when we ask. But he's also somebody that attracts a lot of negativity as well. Almost twice as many people who think positively of him actually think negatively of him. So I think Reform sort of detaching, or Farage detaching from Reform, it could go in one of two directions. Either one, they lose that sort of central figure, that uniting person, that character, the charisma, the ability to sort of command that attention, and they drop down in the polls. Or alternatively, what if they could find somebody who is sort of as popular as him, but without the baggage, without that twice as many people saying that they don't like him? Could that even remove a ceiling for Reform UK? Because they're kind of stuck at 30%, as far as we can see. We've not really had them over 30%. So is there a lid on Reform support? Is there a Farage-sized cap on it that if you took it off...
Quite a big ceiling, isn't it? I'll be happy with that ceiling.
Yeah, it's quite...
Chandeliers everywhere.
Yeah.
Your houses have those ceilings.
Yeah, thank you. The bickering never ends. But if they're going 30, that's... Do you think at this point in the cycle...
At this point, put it this way, Reform are now the principal opposition, right? And typically in mid-parliament, if a government is unpopular and the principal opposition is kind of funneling or channeling that support, we probably would expect them to be up at around 40%.
Okay.
Are there any questions? Anybody? Right, Annabelle.
Yeah, I'm always just very interested in how easy it is to find these Labour members to poll. You've been speaking about these Labour members. Where do you find them, and how do you know they're representative?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a panel of about 500,000 active members in the UK, and along with many other pieces of background information we have about them, such as obviously age, gender, education, we ask them if they're members of political parties. So they self-report that to us, and then through a series of I won't bore you with the details, a long series of checks which happen afterwards and before every survey, we double check with them, we make sure, we ask questions to maybe trip them up to make sure that they are actually members and we can trust them. And then we give them the poll. And how we can be certain they're representative? Well, of course, polling always comes with uncertainty, but there are two things that we do know about Labour membership. One is we know how they voted last time, so we can benchmark to that. And two, because we've got this panel and because we talk to these people every single day, we've been able to watch, as far as our panel can tell us, how the Labour membership has changed since 2020 and account for that in our models of the membership. And so we adjust that, we adjust the targets that we're looking for to try and, as best as we possibly can, represent the membership how it is today.
Cool. Well, I think on that note, we're pretty much
That killer
there.
question is always one. How do you know who they are? Is it?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, one last one, and it better be a humdinger because
It's got to be a Tim Shipman
because it's
humdinger,
Tim Ship-
otherwise.
because it's Tim Shipman.
Sam
Christina
Coates.
will ring her bell.
Sam Coates, why do you hate the vibes so much?
Thank you, Tim.
So, this I am. So, regular listeners may know that Anne and I regularly discuss whether or not a vibes-based analysis of politics is the right one, or whether or not maybe we should include some policy and in fairness, I think you would agree that it's not an either-or. You need to do both. It is very easy to get swept up in the story of our politics, but I think there's so much more to it, because it's not just the storytelling that they tell us. We have to double-check what they say. We have to double-check what they do, because often what they do is very different from what they tell us. And if you only do vibes, you only do what they tell us.
It's self-reported emotion that you don't like. It's when people say, he's feeling, she's feeling X. And this, I'm afraid, like Tim just literally brings this one out in hives. I get that, and I think that's a good corrective. It's what's really, it's the old thing, like the rancor thing in history is like, what really happened? Because you've written a few books about this, Tim. But I have a funny thing, and it's probably working of sort of vague confusion in lots of different polities and countries, is I sometimes think things are felt before they are in some way able to be recorded or reported. And therefore we have what we hope is a fruitful conversation about this.
A tiff, as it's also known. On that note, and here it is. It's the alarm that is now going off that you may know from the background. Thank you very much indeed for joining us at Politics at Sam and Patrick's. Thank you for joining us.